today, taking the time to stand up for this very important Canadian cause. As mentioned, my name is Bernadette, and I am the previous Tim Hortons manager from Calgary. I'm here today to read you my story about the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. Basically, I'm here today to spill the beans on Tim Hortons. I would like you to know that Tim Hortons loves temporary foreign workers. They do not love Canadians. You are simply not preferred. You are good enough to spend your money at Tim Hortons, but you are not good enough to be hired at Tim Hortons. Do not buy where you will not be hired. At one time, Tim Hortons loved me very much. I was treated very well by Tim Hortons prior to the Temporary Foreign Worker Program.
I can get there from the site though, right?
And I was allowed to see a lot of franchisee eyes-only material, things that I should not have seen. Of course, my boss told me not to tell anyone that I saw this information, but some way, the truth always comes out. I was simply at the right place at the right time, and this is why I know what I know about Tim Hortons. For those of you who don't know me, I am a very proud Canadian. My heritage is French Métis from the Blackfoot tribe, and on my mother's side, I am English. We have been here for hundreds of years, and I am Canadian. In my life, my priorities are my children and my country, and that is it. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program attacks the future economic life of my children, and it attacks my country. This is why I'm here today. I'm here to read you my story about my experiences as a manager at Tim Hortons. Although I'm very afraid for several reasons to speak and share the truth of my story, I must. So here's my story, and yes, it is long, but it's important because this country is being sold off piece by piece, job by job. It's important to know the history of who and why this Temporary Foreign Worker Program was brought into the food services industry and now is going throughout all industries. So bear with me, my story is a bit long, but it is important, and this is an important cause.
I want you to hear it.
Here we go. I would like to share with the Canadian public my stories and experiences of abuse to the Temporary Foreign Worker Program as a Tim Hortons manager in Calgary. I worked almost 8 years for Tim Hortons. At this store, I worked over 5 years as the manager, and up until 2010. Every single annual review Tim Hortons has for me says exceeds expectations. I was very trusted, and this is why I know much more than I should. Tim Hortons was a great place to work because of the good coffee, the staff, and the customers. The downside was the owners and corporation greed and the complete lack of respect for the current and potential Canadian employees. I'm quite sure Tim Hortons will be very upset with me and possibly millions of others, but let me explain why I've done this. Your company, and my boss treated me very well in pay. The problem was, with my boss and you as your company, started only after the Temporary Foreign Worker Program began. You see, I got told to do a lot of nasty things to perfectly good people. That was just not right morally. I was told and did things to my staff, both Canadian and temporary foreign workers, that are just not ethical. Tim Hortons is so powerful and popular that few will ever oppose this company. I see the same thing in all franchises throughout this country, all Tim Hortons franchises. They are a bad employer and they discriminate against Canadian employees. The abuses I will talk about range from franchise owner collusion, fraudulent LMOs, temporary foreign worker deals, owner deals, throwing resumes, abuses to temporary foreign workers, and abuses to Canadian workers. I have reported my allegations of abuse to the government, but I think Canadians would be interested in hearing this. My story on this begins far before the temporary foreign worker was ever introduced into the food service industry here in Alberta. It's my understanding from my boss that after all expenses are paid, the wages, the food, the rent, that Tim Hortons' model allows for 10% profit. So if an owner does $2 million in sales, he expects a $200,000 profit. Most Tim Hortons owners have several of these stores, multiple stores. Normally, payroll comes in at 25%. The hours are scheduled based on sales. The Tim Hortons model only provides for minimum wage workers. And this is Alberta. Minimum wage simply doesn't work. All my management, my supervisors, my core at this store were making well over minimum wage. Therefore, my payroll never came in at 25%. On average, payroll came in at 26 to 27%. Every time I went over that 25% wage cost, that extra expense came directly out of my boss's profit. The problem at our store was not that we were short-staffed, schedules can be verified, but rather that we're paying many of our management and regular staff so much of an hourly higher wage, the boss was losing money. In December 2006, possibly January 2007, the boss dropped by in his corporate suit. He was on his way to a franchise corporate meeting here in Edmonton. I was surprised because it's not the usual timing for a corporate meeting. What had happened was a bigwig, someone who owns multiple stores here in Edmonton, had called a meeting of all franchisee owners here in Alberta. My boss was clearly angry that day. He said, basically, we will be telling corporate Tim Hortons, we're not making our profit because we need to pay higher wages here in Alberta. He said, Tim Hortons always makes their profit. They always get paid first. But we're not. So unless they fix our profit line through a royalty break or a price increase, why should we continue? It was literally a battle of the titans. You have hundreds of very, very wealthy franchise owners telling Tim Hortons Corporation, fix our bottom line or we're leaving. In basic terms, collusion is a meeting, sometimes illegal and therefore secretive. It's committed by two people or more in a position of power agreeing to manipulate a market. The manipulation can vary from limiting or saturating a market, price fixing, etc. Within 6 weeks of Tim Hortons Corporation being told that they had a big problem, they came back with a program called the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. The next meeting I describe is where I believe the Calgary Tim Hortons franchisees got together with corporate Tim Hortons and a company named Mercan from the Philippines. Based on what my boss described as happening at this meeting, I was left with the impression Calgary franchise owners were convinced at this meeting to saturate their labor pool with temporary foreign workers in effort to combat our high wages. Perhaps some stores did have a labor shortage. What I'm saying is my store didn't have a labor shortage, but we jumped into that program anyway. In February or March 2007, my boss dropped by. He told me about that meeting, and again, unusual timing, and he said, we will be discussing the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. It was the very first time I had heard of that program, so I did ask, what was it? He said, we can bring in labor from another country. My boss later described, he told me, temporary foreign workers would be paid minimum wage, and that was a lot of money for them, so they would be happy. He said they were all fully trained and experienced, So training would be minimal, and what a savings that would be for the company. He said they would sign a 2-year contract, and after that we would just renew it again. He said no one goes home, they are here to make a new life. He said I could schedule them as I please, and there would be no arguments as to when they worked. He said this will be great. We won't have to deal with any more of this Canadian BS anymore. High wages and fussy to schedule Canadians. These top corporate guys are very smart. This is why they make so much money. What a brilliant idea on the part of Tim Hortons Corporation. They would not be bending on royalty breaks or giving a price increase. They would simply be bringing in cheaper labor. A month or 2 later, my boss came in and said, "Hey, make sure the store is perfect. Mr. Kenny's coming in." See, the store I managed is in Mr. Kenny's riding. And I guess he was visiting to check out the labor shortage or something. So I said, "Who's Mr. Kenny?" And the boss replied, "Our local MP. He has the final word on this temporary foreign worker program." I had no idea who Mr. Kenny was, so I just did as I always did and ran the store. The boss and Mr. Kenny chatted for a few minutes, and today I really wish I had listened in on that conversation. So here's my beef, Mr. Kenny. You were in the store that I managed. What did you see? Did you see a shortage of staff? No. Did you bother asking if I had gotten any resumes? No. You were in a fully staffed, happy, well-paid store. What were you thinking? Honestly, I was so stupid as to how this program was going to work back then. If Mr. Kenny had asked me, "Am I short on labor?" I would have said, "No." Why? Mr. Kenny, in 2010, I wrote a complaint letter to your department regarding the abuses to this program shortly after I quit, telling you what un-Canadian things I and the boss in that store were doing and offered you evidence. There was never any feedback. There was never any request for the evidence. Then, in 2012, my very own previous supervisor at that same store sat beside Mr. Kenny at a meeting in the southeast of Calgary and said to him directly to his face, "I'm the previous manager over here at Tim Hortons, and we're throwing out resumes." Mr. Kenny, very shocked, said, "Oh, I can't believe Tim Hortons would do that." My supervisor was, and then he said, "Besides, you're just a supervisor, you would not have access to the resumes." My supervisor was shocked. She reminded him she had a key to the office, and that was that. I again complained 3 months ago. My boss has yet to be investigated. The only thing this government has done to my boss is give him more temporary foreign workers. Prior to the temporary foreign worker program entering the business I managed, I would hire all types of Canadians. The very young, students, seniors, new immigrants, disadvantaged, gay, experienced, non-experienced, and every ethnic group imaginable. This store was a true melting pot. Once the temporary foreign worker program started, my boss felt he had an unlimited supply of controllable foreign labor. So my hiring policies were changed drastically from hiring all types of Canadians to only hiring certain types of Canadians. Not only are Tim Hortons donuts fresh, but so are their hiring policies. They only want the freshest, newest, youngest, cheapest, fastest workers. One of my boss's favorite expressions when it came to Canadian staff, especially our seniors and our part-time kids, was they're not even worth the minimum wage that we have to pay them. Is that not rude? I was told to deprioritize Canadian hours, throw resumes, stop hiring, and treat the staff as two separate groups. With so many types of Canadians not welcome to work at Tim Hortons, the labor pool is limited indeed. It's no wonder they need temporary foreign workers. The discrimination against Canadian staff began even before one temporary foreign worker arrived. Approximately 3 weeks before the arrival, my boss noticed that I was scheduling almost at full capacity. He said, "You need to stop hiring. You need to make some room on the schedule for our new workers." So I said, "So how am I going to squeeze in all these new workers?" And he said, "Whatever you do, B, make sure all these temporary foreign workers get their 44 hours, and what's left is for the Canadians. We have a contract with them." The temporary foreign workers' hours were priority before they showed up for one shift. If this program began because of a labor shortage, then the schedules tell the truth. I scheduled the same amount of hours the week before they arrived and the week after they arrived. I did not just add 264 hours to my schedule because we were short on workers. I had to fit them in. The only way to fit them in is to cut Canadian hours. Also during this time, the owner was required to do advertising to be approved for the LMO for the program. He noticed that I was keeping a stack of resumes in the office. He told me to throw out all resumes because we don't want anyone to see them. He said to not even bother looking at EI resumes as they just apply because they need to. He said not to even bother, he said if anyone from the government called to ask if we received resumes, just lie, just say no. He told the current manager to delete the online applications, and he did. No worries, boss, no one ever showed up, no one ever called. I did not need any temporary foreign workers at this store. I was not experiencing a labor shortage. I threw hundreds of resumes over the course of the next year, once in front of my supervisor. And as I tossed them in the garbage, I said sarcastically, "Hey, look, no resumes." We both felt bad, and we both know it was wrong. I think with all the Canadian resumes being thrown out, we should make it a federal offense.
Here.
I did what I could to save full-time hours, such as outsourcing some temporary foreign workers to another location, offering up holiday times, etc. But first, I canceled all Canadian overtime hours. The boss told me we would not be scheduling any overtime anymore. The very first employee that I cut was a single mom who'd worked for us for years. She worked 6 or 7 nights every week for years for us just so she could provide for her child. And she did so willingly, and I willingly gave her those hours. It just shows how unwanted reliable Canadian workers became immediately at the beginning of this program. My boss told me to cut her back to 40 hours a week. I told him I would be scheduling her 44 hours, just like the temporary foreign workers. That was the first of the long string of arguments I had with my boss over the fairness between all staff after this program started. I then cut Canadian staff starting at the bottom of the schedule. I remember even scheduling 0 to 4 hours for my part-time staff. Previous to that, I would schedule my part-time staff between 8 and 16 hours. I did not have the heart to fire anyone, but they were severely cut. Within the first schedule that I made for 1 week, over 100 Canadian hours were cut.
That's bullshit.
The first group of temporary foreign workers arrived at the store on a Friday and were scheduled to start on Monday. On Monday morning, I mentioned to the boss that I had a lot of training and orientations to do with the new workers. It's then he said, "Oh no, they're all done their training." He explained to me that several had come in during the weekend while I wasn't there and had done their training. He said, they just wanted to get to work early. They just want to get started. He said they will still work their 44 hours this week. So although not scheduled, the temporary foreign workers came in, did their orientations, got their uniforms. Nothing was recorded on the schedule. It's an employment law that all work, including training, must be paid for. I did tell several of the new workers that we were required to pay them, but they all said, no, it's okay, we just want to get started. So although they all worked 47 hours, they were only paid for 44 hours that first week.
That's horse shit.
Shortly after the arrival of the temporary foreign workers, one of my supervisors and one temporary foreign worker got into a serious argument. The supervisor reported it to me, and I asked her if she had felt threatened, and she said yes. I reported it to the boss as we did not know the worker well. He told me not to write her up. As a manager, I would write people up for lots of things, being late, being out of uniform, etc. I was very surprised that I couldn't write up a temporary foreign worker for threatening my supervisor. He told me there would be no disciplinary action allowed on temporary foreign workers' records.
What?
Simply not fair that Canadians are subject to disciplinary action, but not temporary foreign workers.
It's bullshit.
My boss made it clear that he wanted to move temporary foreign workers into management when positions became available, as they could be paid a much cheaper rate. He mentioned that one of our temporary foreign workers was actually a skilled worker and was capable of being an assistant manager. I didn't think anything of it because I had an assistant manager, a Canadian assistant manager. He then said our current assistant manager was simply not worth the money that we were paying him, and that he could literally get 2 or 3 temporary foreign workers for the price of one. I did the math, and yes, he is correct. His next comment was, oh, no more raises for that assistant manager, and so it was. When a position for a supervisor became available, the boss wanted one particular temporary foreign worker promoted. What I didn't know until recently was this promotion was not in accordance to immigration rules. I promoted this temporary foreign worker to a skilled management position, and she did not have a permanent residency card. You must work X amount of hours and wait X amount of time before you're allowed to accept a skilled position, and she had not done either. The second promotion of a temporary foreign worker to management was a bit ridiculous. This worker was in no way qualified to run a shift. She was immature and she had serious personal problems with some other staff. I was told by the boss to promote her in front of many other deserving Canadian employees because she was having difficulty getting her permanent residency card. The worker did have the correct amount of hours and time required, but she simply couldn't qualify for a permanent residency card without a faked promotion to skilled management. So this temporary foreign worker was promoted. However, after a few weeks, because she was unable to handle the job, she quit. A few weeks later, I had to put her back on the schedule as a supervisor again because she could not, again, qualify for a permanent residency card on her own. This worker did not get a raise for this promotion as it was not a real promotion. A lot of business owners are offering up skilled positions and promotions to temporary foreign workers instead of Canadians as a way to help temporary foreign workers get a permanent residency card. This is, needless to say, very unfair to deserving Canadians, and promotions are supposed to be awarded on performance, not immigration deals. Since this business opened, employee vacation was accrued year by year, and once the employee was ready to take a vacation, we paid out that vacation pay. In 2008, my boss told me to stop accruing vacation pay and pay it out weekly, bi-weekly. I asked him why the change in policy. He said this way we can cut down on Canadian vacation time because you see the Canadians won't save that vacation pay every 2 weeks. So by the time that vacation rolls around, they won't have any money. He said though, those Filipinos though, they know how to save money. They won't have a problem saving for a vacation. Because no staff took a vacation, the accrued vacation on employees owed to date was added to their regular paychecks, costing the employees more in taxes. Because some temporary foreign workers had accrued a large amount of vacation pay, the boss had the temporary foreign workers' vacation pay put on a separate check so they would not have to pay extra taxes.
Oh, for fuck's sakes.
Previous to the temporary foreign worker program, I would, as a manager, do annual reviews on my staff and would give raises according to individual performance. When it came time to do the temporary foreign workers annual reviews, the boss just said, just give all of them X amount of raise. What this meant was, though, even the weakest of temporary foreign workers, and I did have some, got the same raise as the strongest. They were given raises based on group performance, whereas Canadian employees were still judged on individual performance. My boss bought a 3-bedroom townhouse to house 6 adult temporary foreign worker females. He charged them $300 each and mentioned how he should have charged them more, but it was okay because the new workers deserve a break. He also decided to get into the immigration business. He had friends from the Philippines and they had asked my boss if he could bring a relative over for them. So he did. If he could do that for them, he would not have to provide accommodations. At least 2 of the temporary foreign worker females had to leave the townhouse soon after arrival because of extreme infighting. They both had to leave and pay their own accommodations elsewhere, and in regards to that, the boss said, hey, not my problem. They want to leave, I can't stop them. He just could not have cared less where they lived. One of the temporary foreign workers at the store got pregnant, and her work contract was about to expire, so she made a deal with the boss. The deal was if the boss could renew her contract, she would only take 3 months off maternity leave. Her contract was renewed, and the temporary foreign worker had her baby, but when 3 months was up, the boss, the temporary foreign worker, wanted 1 more month off on maternity. The boss was not happy and basically told her, we had a deal. Get back to work or I will cancel your contract. She contacted me as I'd already quit and told me the managers were threatening her back to work. And she did return to work. I think in this situation they both signed an illegal LMO contract, but ultimately it is the boss's responsibility. When you walk into a Tim Hortons or a McDonald's, any fast food chain in Alberta and Canada, and look around, what do you see? If you see the vast majority of staff are young and fit and most are one ethnic group, you are in a temporary foreign worker store. Those in the core of the store, those in management type uniforms, are all one ethnic group. Temporary foreign worker food services stores have little to no diversity at the core of these stores. They practice strict, unethical, and un-Canadian hiring and promotion policies. The full-time, skilled Canadian staff are and have been disappearing quickly. The only Canadians you will see are the controllable minimum wage, part-time gap fillers limited to front counter and drive-through. Don't let the few Canadians at front counter and drive-through throw you off. The great majority of Canadians have left Tim Hortons. I was motivated to write my story after I oversaw a conversation in English on Facebook between two temporary foreign workers last month. One who I know very well, both as a longtime personal friend and a previous employee. They were basically saying how they didn't understand why Canadians were making such a fuss, and why wouldn't an employer want to hire them? They're all hardworking and loyal. It was then that one temporary foreign worker said, and I will never forget it. She said, "I know if I own a business in this country, I will definitely be hiring temporary foreign workers." Not even a consideration for a Canadian. You might say, "Oh, I know the local Tim Hortons manager. They're really nice. They would never do this to Canadians." Well, your manager does what they're told to do to keep their jobs. These managers also will never admit to practicing this type of hiring policies. And let's face it, if you're not a good manager, it's much easier to employ temporary foreign workers. They are much easier to control, to schedule, to train, to manage. Much easier to have a temporary foreign worker than it is to have a Canadian. These food service owners and corporations refuse to pay Canadians properly, and this is why they struggle to find employees who are catching on to their greed. I've had several staff over the years mention they have no food, they could not pay their bills, even though they worked very hard. And I also had temporary foreign workers tell me, once they sent their entire paycheck back, they literally had $10.65 for the week to eat. This is nothing but exploitation. To Tim Hortons CEO, I hope you gave Andy a great big bonus for coming up with this idea. Yes, I do know it was the Liberals who introduced this temporary foreign worker program, but it was Tim Hortons that brought it into the food service industry. At the store I managed, except for myself, my entire management team has left, and they've been all replaced by less expensive temporary foreign workers. The boss had a plan. He did not like paying his staff well, so instead he preferred to bring in the cheapest labor he could find. This is what happened at the store I managed. The one thing I know is all Tim Hortons work in the same fashion. I'm almost done. When the government will not help its own people, the only thing to do is try to sway the public's opinion. Canadians will have an uphill battle for jobs, promotions for a long time in the food service industry and many other industries. The bottom line for business is price, not your work ethic. I actually have people tell me they no longer support these companies because they see the discrimination against Canadians. Canadian worker is considered less productive, less reliable, less controllable, less nice, and less preferred. It does not matter how hard you work. The new stereotype brought in with this program is perpetuated daily in the media. I would like to bring in many temporary foreign worker politicians and lawyers and reporters. I think once these occupations are saturated with base pay, maybe they will actually see what's happening, and then we can call them lazy too.
Yeah.
Woo!
I do appreciate you listening to that very long story. Thank you very much.